Let's start with something most people were never properly taught in school. A cell is not a blob. Say that again, slowly, because the textbook drawings lied to you. A cell, specifically a human cell, is one of the most complex structures in the known universe. More intricate than any machine ever built by human hands. More organized than any city ever planned by human minds. There are approximately 37 trillion cells in your body right now. 37 trillion. If you counted one per second, without stopping, without sleeping, it would take you over 1 million years to finish. And each one of those cells, every single one, contains an entire world inside it. Let's walk through it together. The outer wall of a cell is called the plasma membrane. It isn't just a wall. It's an intelligent border, covered in proteins that act as sensors, gates, and communicators. It reads the environment outside constantly, deciding what to let in, what to push out, what signals to respond to. It is, in every meaningful sense, aware of its surroundings. Pass through that membrane and you're inside the cytoplasm, a dense, gel-like fluid that is anything but empty. It is packed with structures called organelles, each one a specialized machine, each one doing a specific job, all of them working in coordination so precise that human engineers can only dream of replicating it. There's the endoplasmic reticulum, a vast folded network of membranes that manufactures and transports proteins. If you unfolded all the endoplasmic reticulum in a single liver cell, it would cover an area larger than a football field. There are ribosomes, tiny molecular machines that read genetic instructions and build proteins with an error rate so low it defies comprehension. They make fewer than one mistake per 10,000 amino acids assembled. No human factory in history has ever approached that accuracy. There are lysosomes, the recycling centers, breaking down waste and debris with precision chemistry that would take a human chemist months to replicate in a laboratory. There is the Golgi apparatus, the cell's postal system, packaging and shipping molecules to exact destinations inside and outside the cell with address tags made of sugar molecules. And at the very center, the nucleus, the library, the command center, containing 6 feet of DNA coiled so tightly, so elegantly, into a space 1/10,000th the width of a human hair, that scientists still do not fully understand how it all fits. 6 feet. In every single one of your 37 trillion cells, that's enough DNA if you stretched it all out end to end, to reach from here to Pluto, and back again. 6 times, but here is where it gets truly extraordinary, because floating in this already impossible world, near the outer edges of the cell, is something that doesn't quite belong, something older, something stranger, something that arrived here from somewhere else entirely. 2 billion years ago the Earth was unrecognizable. No trees, no animals, no oxygen in any meaningful quantity. The sky was a haze of methane and nitrogen. The oceans were warm and shallow and teemed with bacteria, single-celled creatures living fast, dying fast, consuming everything around them. This was a world of ruthless simplicity. And then something happened that changed the history of life forever. 2 cells met. One was a larger cell, an early ancestor of what we now call eukaryotes. Cells with a nucleus. It was big, relatively speaking, good at surviving, but slow, inefficient, limited in the energy it could produce. The other was a small bacterium. Tiny, but extraordinarily good at one thing, producing energy. It had evolved a mechanism, a kind of biological power plant, that could take oxygen and turn it into a form of energy called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. The universal currency of life. What happened next was either an accident or a miracle, depending on how you look at it. The larger cell swallowed the smaller one, but it didn't digest it. Instead, and no one knows exactly why, the larger cell let the smaller one live. Inside it, protected, fed, maintained, and in return, the small bacterium did what it did best. It made energy. Enormous amounts of it. Far more than the larger cell could ever make on its own. Together they became something neither could be alone. This event, this ancient merging of 2 separate organisms into one, is called endosymbiosis. And the theory that describes it was put forward by a remarkable scientist named Lynn Margulis in 1966. She was largely laughed at. Her paper was rejected by 15 scientific journals. Today, it is accepted as one of the foundational facts of biology, because the evidence is overwhelming. The mitochondria inside your cells, right now, this very moment, as you watch this, are descended from those ancient bacteria. They still carry their own DNA. separate from yours, circular in shape like bacterial DNA, not linear like the DNA in your nucleus. They still divide on their own schedule, independently of when your cell divides. They have their own ribosomes, their own protein synthesis machinery, their own internal language, slightly different from the rest of the cell. They are, in every meaningful biological sense, a different organism living inside you, an ancient bacterium that moved in 2 billion years ago and never left. And here is the part that should genuinely stop you cold. You did not inherit your mitochondria from both of your parents. You inherited them only from your mother. When a sperm cell fertilizes an egg, the sperm's mitochondria are almost always destroyed. Only the mother's mitochondria survive and are passed on to the new organism. Your mitochondrial DNA, the ancient bacterial DNA living inside every one of your cells, traces an unbroken maternal line stretching back through your mother, her mother's mother, all the way back through time, back through early Homo sapiens in Africa, back through earlier hominids, back through primates, through early mammals, all the way, in an unbroken thread, to that original merging event 2 billion years ago. That ancient bacterium is still alive inside you. In a very real sense, you are not one organism, you are two. To understand why mitochondria matter, why scientists are now calling them one of the most important frontiers in all of medicine, you have to understand what they actually do. They make energy. But saying that is like saying the sun makes light. Technically true, completely inadequate. The process by which mitochondria produce energy is called cellular respiration, and it is one of the most elegant chemical processes in existence. Here's how it works. You eat food, carbohydrates, fats, proteins. Your digestive system breaks these down into simpler molecules, primarily glucose, a simple sugar. That glucose travels through your bloodstream to your cells. Inside the cell, glucose is first broken down in the cytoplasm in a process called glycolysis. This produces a small amount of energy and creates molecules called pyruvate. Those pyruvate molecules then enter the mitochondria, passing through a double membrane into the inner chamber of this ancient bacterium living inside you. Inside, they enter a cycle of reactions called the Krebs cycle, a spinning wheel of chemistry that strips electrons away from the pyruvate molecules and loads them onto carrier proteins. Those energized electrons then travel along what's called the electron transport chain, a series of protein complexes embedded in the inner mitochondrial membrane. As the electrons move through these complexes, they pump hydrogen ions across the membrane, creating an electrical gradient, a tiny voltage, measured in millivolts. A single mitochondrion generates a membrane potential of approximately 180 millivolts across a membrane only 5 nanometers thick. To put that in perspective, that is equivalent to 30 million volts per meter. The strongest lightning bolt in a thunderstorm generates about 3 million volts per meter. The mitochondrion in your cells generates 10 times the electrical field strength of a lightning bolt, in a structure you cannot see with the naked eye. At the end of this process, the hydrogen ions flow back through a protein called ATP synthase, a molecular motor that spins at up to 9,000 revolutions per minute, and that spinning motion powers the production of ATP. Your body produces its own weight in ATP every single day, every thought you have, every heartbeat, every blink, every word you speak, powered by these ancient bacteria spinning molecular turbines at 9,000 RPM inside every cell of your body, right now, as you watch this. And scientists have recently discovered that this process is even stranger and more beautiful than they thought, because the electrons moving through the electron transport chain may be doing something that physics wasn't supposed to allow. In 2007, a team of researchers at the University of California, Berkeley published a paper that sent shockwaves through both biology and physics. They were studying photosynthesis, the process plants use to convert sunlight into energy. And they discovered something that should have been impossible. The electrons moving through the photosynthetic machinery were not behaving like classical particles. They were behaving like quantum waves. They were existing in multiple places simultaneously, exploring all possible paths through the protein at once, and then collapsing onto the most efficient path, with a precision that no classical system could achieve. The plants were using quantum mechanics to achieve near-perfect efficiency in energy transfer. This process, quantum coherence in biological systems, had been assumed to be impossible in warm, wet, messy biological environments. Quantum effects, scientists believed, only survived in cold, isolated, controlled laboratory conditions. Living cells are warm, wet, chaotic, and yet the quantum effects were there, unmistakable, reproducible. And since that discovery, researchers have found hints of the same quantum behavior in other biological processes, including in mitochondria, including in the electron transport chain, the very process that powers your cells. The possibility that your mitochondria use quantum coherence to achieve their extraordinary efficiency is now a serious scientific hypothesis. Not fringe, not speculation. Serious, peer-reviewed, actively investigated science. And if it's true, if the little ancient bacteria living inside you are harnessing the laws of quantum mechanics to generate energy, then the cell is not just a universe in miniature, it is a quantum universe, operating by rules that are genuinely stranger than anything in science fiction. But quantum biology is only one of the frontiers where mitochondria are changing everything, because scientists have recently discovered that mitochondria do something else entirely, something no one expected, something that connects them directly to your emotions, your mental health, your aging, and possibly even your consciousness. For most of the 20th century, mitochondria were understood as the power plants of the cell, energy factories, necessary, important, but essentially passive. That picture has been completely dismantled. We now know that mitochondria are active decision makers. They do not simply sit there and make ATP. They sense the state of the cell. They communicate with the nucleus. They respond to stress, to nutrients, to hormones, to signals from the brain. They form dynamic networks, fusing together and splitting apart, in response to cellular conditions. And most dramatically, they hold the switch to one of the most important processes in biology. They decide when a cell dies. The process is called apoptosis, programmed cell death. And it is not a malfunction. It is not damage. It is one of the most important and elegant processes in the living world. Every day, your body eliminates somewhere between 50 and 70 billion cells through apoptosis. Cells that are old, damaged, infected, or potentially dangerous. Cells that need to be removed to keep the organism healthy. Without apoptosis, you would not have fingers. The skin between your fingers in the womb is eliminated by programmed cell death, sculpting your hand into its final form. Without it, cancerous cells would not be removed. Immune responses would spiral out of control. Development would be impossible. And mitochondria are the gatekeepers of this process. When a cell receives the signal to die, or when the mitochondria themselves detect conditions that make death necessary, they release a protein called cytochrome C. This release triggers a cascade of events that leads to the cell's orderly dismantling. Its contents packaged neatly for recycling. Its membrane intact, no mess, no inflammation. A clean molecular suicide directed from the inside. The mitochondria hold the key to this decision, and increasingly, scientists are discovering that when mitochondria malfunction, when they lose their ability to make this decision correctly, the consequences are catastrophic. Cancer, neurodegenerative disease, metabolic disorders, accelerated aging, and something even more surprising, mental illness. In 2021, a landmark paper published in the journal Nature Reviews Neuroscience proposed something that, a decade earlier, would have been considered outrageous. That mitochondrial dysfunction is a central mechanism in depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Not a side effect. Not a consequence. A central mechanism. The lead researcher was Dr. Martin Picard at Columbia University, and his work has since opened an entirely new field, mitochondrial psychiatry. Here's the logic, and it's devastating in its clarity. The brain is the most energy-hungry organ in the body. It represents about 2% of your body weight, but consumes roughly 20% of your total energy production. Neurons, brain cells, fire constantly, day and night, even during sleep. They are among the most metabolically demanding cells in existence. And to fire, neurons need ATP. Enormous amounts of it. Continuously, if mitochondria are dysfunctional, if they are producing less energy than they should, or producing harmful byproducts called reactive oxygen species that damage cellular machinery, the neurons suffer. Their ability to fire, to communicate, to maintain the complex signaling networks that produce thought and emotion and memory, is compromised. This is not a metaphor. This is biochemistry. But Picard's research goes further than energy alone. His team has demonstrated that mitochondria respond directly to psychological stress. That chronic stress, the kind generated by trauma, by poverty, by loneliness, by sustained emotional pain, measurably changes the structure and function of mitochondria. The ancient bacteria inside your cells respond to your emotional state. And when they respond in unhealthy ways, when stress reshapes them, damages them, reduces their number or their efficiency, the effects feed back on the brain, contributing to the very psychological states that created the stress in the first place. A feedback loop, a vicious cycle, running between your emotional life and the 2 billion-year-old organisms living inside your cells. The implications are staggering. If this model is correct, and the evidence is growing rapidly, then depression is not purely a chemical imbalance in the traditional sense. It is, at least in part, a mitochondrial disease, an energetic failure in the cells that power your mind. And if that's true, then treatments targeting mitochondrial function, through exercise, through specific nutrients, through drugs that support mitochondrial health, may be as important as any existing psychiatric medication. This research is young. It is not settled, but it is serious, rigorous science being done at the highest levels of the field. And it changes everything about how we think about the relationship between body and mind. Let's step back for a moment, because we've been talking about mitochondria specifically, but the deeper truth is about the cell as a whole. The reason scientists use the word universe when they talk about the cell is not poetic license. It is structural description. The organization of a living cell echoes the organization of the cosmos in ways that are genuinely, verifiably strange. Consider scale. The observable universe spans roughly 93 billion light-years. Within that space, matter organizes itself at multiple scales: quantum particles, atoms, molecules, cells, organisms, planets, solar systems, galaxies, galaxy clusters, superclusters, the cosmic web. Inside a cell, matter organizes itself with similar hierarchical elegance. Subatomic particles, atoms, molecules, macromolecules, molecular machines, organelles, the cell itself. At each scale, new properties emerge that did not exist at the scale below. Water is wet, but its component atoms, hydrogen and oxygen, are not. A neuron can think, but the proteins and lipids it's made of cannot. This principle, emergent complexity at each level of organization, is the same principle that produces galaxies from gas clouds and consciousness from neurons. The cell and the cosmos run on the same deep logic. Consider networks. The cosmic web, the large-scale structure of the universe, forms a vast network of filaments and nodes. Dark matter forms scaffolding. Gas flows along filaments toward dense nodes. Galaxies cluster at intersections. Inside the cell, the cytoskeleton, a network of protein filaments, forms a structural scaffolding that organizes the cell's interior. Molecules travel along these filaments like cargo along highway networks. Signals propagate through the network. The cell's shape, its mechanical properties, its ability to divide and move, all depend on this filament network. When researchers visualize the cytoskeleton and the cosmic web side by side, which they have done in published papers, the structural resemblance is striking enough to require explanation. It may be that the same mathematical principles governing how complexity organizes itself at large scales also govern how it organizes at the small. That the universe and the cell are not merely analogous, that they are, in some deep sense, the same kind of thing. Consider information. The universe, according to some of the most serious physicists alive today, including Stephen Hawking, Jacob Bekenstein, and Leonard Susskind, may be fundamentally informational in nature. The laws of black hole thermodynamics suggest that information is a physical quantity, as real as energy or matter. Inside the cell, information is the primary currency. DNA is a storage medium. The genetic code is a language. Protein synthesis is information processing. Signal transduction is computation. The cell reads, writes, copies, edits, and acts on information continuously. Some theoretical biologists have proposed that life is best understood not as chemistry, but as information processing. That what distinguishes the living from the non-living is not the atoms involved. Every atom in your body was once part of a star, once part of the ocean, once part of the soil, but the way information is organized and processed. If they are right, then the second universe inside your cells is not merely a metaphor for complexity. It is an actual universe of information, running in parallel to the physical universe, interacting with it, shaped by it, shaping it in return. Let's talk about where science is right now, because this is not history. This is not settled. This is happening. In 2023, researchers at the Max Planck Institute used a technique called cryo-electron tomography to produce the first true three-dimensional maps of the interior of a mitochondrion at nanometer resolution. For the first time, scientists could see the exact arrangement of the protein complexes in the electron transport chain, the precise geometry of the inner membrane's folds, called cristae, which dramatically increased the surface area available for energy production. What they found was not the static, orderly picture that diagrams in textbooks suggest. It was dynamic, shifting. The protein complexes assembled and disassembled in response to cellular conditions. The cristae reshaped themselves. The inner architecture of the mitochondrion was not a fixed machine but a responsive, adaptive system, more like a living city than a factory. In 2024, researchers at MIT published findings suggesting that mitochondria communicate with each other across the cell, and potentially between cells, through signals that travel through networks called tunneling nanotubes. Thin, membrane-enclosed bridges between cells, through which mitochondria can actually transfer between cells, donating energy to neighbors in distress, cells sharing their power plants, tissues operating as cooperative energy networks. The individual cell, it turns out, is not fully individual. It participates in a community. Its mitochondria travel. They are transferred. They are shared. At the Salk Institute in California, researchers studying aging have found that the decline in mitochondrial function is one of the most consistent and measurable hallmarks of cellular aging. As cells age, their mitochondria accumulate damage in their DNA, that ancient bacterial DNA that has been copied and recopied for billions of years. Mutations accumulate. Energy production declines. The signals that trigger apoptosis become dysregulated. And critically, reversing mitochondrial dysfunction reverses some aspects of cellular aging. In animal studies, improving mitochondrial function in aged cells makes them behave more like young cells. The implications for human longevity research are enormous. There are now serious, well-funded scientific programs at the National Institutes of Health, at private longevity research companies, at universities on every continent, dedicated to understanding mitochondria well enough to intervene, to protect them, to repair them, to potentially restore them. Because if the ancient bacteria inside your cells are the engine of life, then protecting that engine may be the closest thing we have to protecting life itself. Everything we've discussed lives in a realm of science that can feel abstract, distant, like something happening in a laboratory far away from your daily life. But it isn't. It is happening in your body, right now. In this moment, the mitochondria in your cells are responding to what you ate this morning, to whether you slept last night, to the stress you felt yesterday and the week before, to the exercise you did or didn't do, to the air you're breathing and the light hitting your skin. They are not passive. They are not separate from your life. They are woven into it at the most fundamental level imaginable. And scientists are learning, with increasing specificity, what supports them and what destroys them. Physical movement, exercise, is one of the most powerful mitochondrial interventions known. When you exercise, you don't just burn energy. You signal your cells to make more mitochondria, a process called mitochondrial biogenesis. More mitochondria means more energy capacity, more resilience, better cellular function across every system in your body. A single session of endurance exercise increases the expression of genes involved in mitochondrial biogenesis within hours. Chronic sedentary behavior does the opposite. It reduces mitochondrial number and efficiency. It accelerates the accumulation of mitochondrial DNA damage. It is, at the cellular level, an act of slow self-destruction. Sleep is when mitochondria repair themselves. The brain in particular uses sleep to flush cellular waste, restore energy reserves, and allow mitochondria in neurons to perform maintenance that cannot happen while the neuron is actively firing. Chronic sleep deprivation measurably damages mitochondrial function in the brain. Certain nutrients are directly involved in mitochondrial function, CoQ10, a molecule found in mitochondrial membranes, is essential for the electron transport chain. Magnesium is required for ATP synthesis. B vitamins are cofactors in the Krebs cycle. Iron is a component of cytochrome proteins. Omega-3 fatty acids influence mitochondrial membrane fluidity and function. This is not supplement marketing. This is biochemistry. These molecules are not optional extras. They are structural components of the machinery that keeps you alive. Chronic psychological stress, as Picard's research shows, directly damages mitochondria. The mechanisms involve stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, that, in sustained high levels, disrupt mitochondrial membrane potential and trigger excessive production of reactive oxygen species. This is why chronic stress ages you, not metaphorically, literally, at the cellular level. And this is why the practices that reduce chronic stress, connection, meaning, rest, movement, time in nature, are not luxuries. They are mitochondrial medicine. We began this journey by asking you to imagine shrinking down, to enter a cell and find a universe. We've traveled through 2 billion years of evolutionary history, through quantum physics and molecular motors, through the science of the mind and the biology of aging, through a frontier of research that is changing everything we thought we knew about what life is and how it works. But there is one question that sits underneath all of this. One question that the greatest scientists in the world are now beginning carefully to ask out loud. If the cell is a universe, complete, self-organizing, operating by its own deep laws, and if consciousness emerges from the activity of cells, then is consciousness itself something that exists at every level of organization? Is there something it is like to be a mitochondrion? Is there something it is like to be a cell? This is not a frivolous question. It is being asked seriously by researchers in the fields of integrated information theory, panpsychism, and quantum mind theory. It connects to the deepest unsolved problem in all of science, the hard problem of consciousness, the question of why physical processes give rise to subjective experience at all. We don't have the answer. We may not have it in our lifetimes, but the fact that the question can be asked, seriously, rigorously, by credentialed scientists at the best institutions in the world, tells you something about how far our understanding has come. A century ago, the cell was a blob, a bag of chemicals. The mitochondrion was unknown. Today we know it is an ancient organism 2 billion years old, powering you with lightning-strength electrical fields, potentially harnessing quantum mechanics, making life-and-death decisions, responding to your emotions, shaping your mental health, holding the keys to aging, communicating between cells, participating in a network that stretches across tissues and organs, and the whole vast complexity of a living human being. The universe you can see through a telescope is vast and ancient and extraordinary. But there is another universe, older, in some ways, stranger, in some ways, just as intricate, just as governed by deep and beautiful laws, and it is not out there, across the light years. It is in here 37 trillion times over. In every cell of your body, breathing, firing, spinning, deciding, alive right now.